A girl in a wrinkled white puffer coat stepped out of a budget cabin at Frosthelm Peaks, Europe's most luxurious ski resort, and within moments, the world decided she didn't belong. How could someone with secondhand skis, a hand-knit wool hat, and boots more suited for a thrift shop than the Alps dare to set foot where the air reeked of money and power? From where are you watching this? Your living room, a cafe, a subway, ride home? Wherever it is, take a second and imagine yourself in that snow. Not dressed in brand new gear, not behind a velvet rope, but as her, as the simple woman who dared to show up. They noticed her before she even reached the main lodge. Not because she was loud or demanding. She was silent, calm, but it was the wrong kind of silence, they thought. Not polished, not packaged, just quiet. Elise, Ren, someone muttered, squinting through tinted goggles. That can't be Noah Marchand's girlfriend. That's not his girlfriend, a woman in a diamond-studded fur hat said with a laugh. That's the help. A chuckle, then two. Then an avalanche of sneers. To them, Elise looked like she'd wandered onto the mountain by mistake. Her coat had creases. Her skis had scratches. Her hat, it wasn't some luxury cashmere brand, but a clumsy hand-woven thing, the kind made by someone who knits by heart, not for profit. And the irony? She didn't flinch. Not when they aimed their phones at her. Not when they zoomed in on every imperfection, every outdated zipper, every stitch of handmade warmth on her hat. She didn't react even when someone whispered, "Did she come here on a Groupon?" But let's back up. Let's talk about the kind of place Frosthelm Peaks is. You don't just ski here, you announce your arrival with private helicopters. You don't wear coats for warmth, you wear them to be seen. Celebrities, royals, and CEOs flock here for the ice, the fashion, and the cameras. A single day pass costs more than an average worker's monthly rent. Ski lifts buzz overhead like golden veins, carrying people in 15,000 suits, their skis lacquered. Personalized, practically glowing. And among all this, Elise stepped out of a shuttle bus, her boots cracking into the glittering frost, leaving footprints that would soon be mocked by millions. Noah Marchand walked beside her, 28 Fortune magazine's youngest CEO, worth an 80 billion eyes like emeralds. And yet he touched her shoulder gently, introduced her as his girlfriend, and smiled with quiet pride. The crowd didn't applaud. It gasped. Natalia Van Cleve, daughter of the banking dynasty that had funded Frosthelm's exclusive lounge, stood nearby draped in platinum furs. She stared at Elise like she'd stepped in something offensive. "Noah," she said loudly, "you brought your little sister skiing, or is this your ski valet?" The laughter wasn't just cruel, it was organized, as if they'd rehearsed it. Phones lit up, hashtags appeared. Comments flooded in from livestream viewers. Hashtag Frosthelm fail, charity case, Noah lost. Still, Elise didn't break. She reached up and adjusted the corner of her wool hat. A few strands of chestnut hair caught the breeze. Her hazel eyes steady as glacial ice never flinched. You might ask, why didn't she say anything? But maybe the better question is, why should she? She had grown up on the wild slopes of Montana. Her father, a retired ski instructor with frost-bitten knuckles and stories etched in crow's feet, had taught her the mountain long before she could spell slope. And before the world had mocked her name, before she became a target, before cameras twisted her into a meme, she had been one of the most promising ski talents in America until the scandal. At 19, Elise Ren's Olympic dream was stolen in a single headline, doping allegations against national hopeful. What wasn't printed was the truth. The false testimony, the forged results, the corporate politics orchestrated by none other than the Van Cleve patriarch, Natalia's father, who wanted to clear the path for his allies' daughters. Elise never spoke out, not because she was guilty, but because no one would have listened. Now here she was on the same snow those daughters believed they owned. Natalia approached again. Her fur coat shimmered like silver fire. Her voice carried like a blade. "You're embarrassing, Noah. That coat, those skis. Did you dig them out of a dumpster?" People laughed harder. Phones zoomed in on Elise's gear. One guy called out, "She looks like she fell off the back of a supply truck." Another shouted, "Careful, her boots might leak humility into the snow." And yet Elise stood still, silent. But silence is not weakness. Sometimes it's warning. Her father, watching from a cracked phone in a trailer 3 states away, trembled. He could see it in her face, that look. The same one she had as a child before a race, before she leapt off cliffs and raced down trees. The look that said, "You think I'm small because you're looking in the wrong direction?" Still the insults rain. She's a joke. She's a thrift store ad campaign. Noah must be going through a phase. Maybe it's for PR. Inspirational poor girl content. Natalia leaned closer, lips curled. You'll never belong here, Elise. You're a beggar wearing a billionaire's shadow. Noah deserves a queen, not a peasant. It wasn't the words that broke people watching. It was the way Elise didn't flinch, didn't reply, just gripped her skis a little tighter, eyes steady, shoulders straight. Somewhere in the crowd, a teenage girl whispered to her friend, "Why isn't she crying?" And the answer came unspoken. Because when you've already been exiled from your dream, shamed by the press, lied about by the powerful, and cast out from the thing you love most, there's nothing left to fear. A final insult came from a ski instructor, one paid under the table by Natalia's clique. He looked at Elise's skis and laughed. "Miss, this isn't the rental shack. Your gear's a safety hazard. Maybe try the kiddie slope." Even some staff laughed. And that's when something shifted, not in Elise, but in the audience. The cruelty had gone too far, too rehearsed, too shameless. Comments on the live stream began to turn. Why is no one stopping this? She hasn't said a word, and they're tearing her apart. I don't care who she is, this isn't right. But it was the moment a billionaire's daughter tossed her glove at Elise's feet and said, "Pick it up, charity case," that the world truly saw the monster Frosthelm had become. And Elise, calm as ever, stepped over the glove. No eye roll, no dramatic sigh. Just a glance sharp and cutting into Natalia's gaze. And for the briefest moment, Natalia flinched. Elise walked on, toward the lifts, toward death. "Curl, the most dangerous slope in the Alps," the murmurs began. "She's not seriously going to ski that. She'll die. She doesn't even have the right gear." Natalia shouted one last time, this time for the live stream. "One run. Death curl. If you win, I'll donate $2 million to charity. If you lose, you kneel in front of the press and say, 'I am not worthy of Noah Martian.'" The crowd gasped. Noah stepped forward enough, but Elise held up her hand, her voice soft, clear, yet colder than the snow. "Let them bet. But if I win, if I win, they leave this mountain and never speak my name again." And in that moment, something ancient stirred. A fire the mountain itself had forgotten. She wasn't a guest anymore. She was the storm, the reckoning. The simple woman with a past carved from injustice and a soul sharpened by silence. And Frosthelm was about to learn what happens when you mistake quiet for weak. So I ask again, from where are you watching this? Because when the mountain bows and the ice remembers and the winds whisper her name, you'll want to say you saw it happen from the beginning. Elise tightened the strap on her worn gloves as the cold wind sliced across her face. The resort speakers crackled with a classical waltz echoing across the slopes like a mockery. Somewhere far below, photographers were snapping shots of a pop star sipping imported hot chocolate near a crystal fire pit. But up here, just a few yards from the death curl lift, Elise stood alone, the world watching, waiting, daring her to crumble. A ski lift operator, young with mirrored goggles and a logo-stitched jacket, stood nearby. He hadn't laughed when others did, but neither had he spoken in her defense. Now, as Elise approached the platform, he hesitated. "You sure about this?" he asked, not unkindly. She nodded once, no words. Her eyes locked on the summit above. Behind her, the crowd had begun to assemble at the observation deck, phones held high, streaming the moment live. The mockery had grown quiet, not because it had ended, but because the stakes had shifted. This was no longer a sideshow. It had become a showdown. Elise took her place on the lift, the chair rattling slightly beneath her. As it began to rise, she didn't look back. Below her, the sprawling opulence of Frosthelm glimmered like a snow globe. People who'd laughed at her 10 minutes ago now stood shoulder to shoulder, their breath-forming clouds of curiosity and doubt. She wasn't just being watched, she was being measured. As the lift ascended, Elise's mind drifted not to fear but to preparation. The mountain had been her language long before society tried to silence her. She remembered the lines of Montana's backcountry, like the creases in her palm. She remembered learning to read snow, the way it changed its tone, depending on pressure and temperature, the way wind sculpted danger into innocent-looking drifts. She had missed this, the quiet, the clarity on the mountain. No one asked about pedigree or paycheck. Either you skied or you didn't. As the peak neared, Elise's memory slid back uninvited to the last real competition she ever entered, nationals, the qualifier for the Olympic team. She had led after the first run, clocked a time faster than any of the Federation's Golden Girls. And then the test, the false test. She remembered her father's silence on the drive home, not angry, not broken, just quiet, like a man who knew justice didn't always come with a second chance. Now today perhaps it had. The lift rattled one last time and stopped. The peak stretched before her like a blank canvas. Death Curl was infamous, steep sharp with a turn so narrow it had ended careers. Most elite skiers only attempted it during closed trials. Never in public, and certainly not on live stream. Waiting at the top, she was greeted by a middle-aged course marshal, clipboard in hand. He gave her a quick once-over, pausing just a beat too long on her skis. "Are those wood core? They're mine," Elise said. Calm, final. He scratched something on his clipboard, shrugged and gestured toward the gate. The sky above was a dome of winter blue wind, whispered over the edge, kicking up flecks of snow like stardust. She clicked into place. The sensors chirped softly, syncing with the resort's leaderboard system. Her father, still watching on his old phone, saw the light turn green. A voice on the PA system, smoothed out by a British accent, announced, "Next up, Elise, Ren independent skier, one-timed run, course death curl, conditions, optimal." Optimal, Elise thought, was relative. She crouched slightly, body poised, weight evenly distributed. Her fingers twitched the muscle memory, singing. The world funneled into a single sound. The countdown. 3, 2, 1. She pushed off. The first seconds were pure acceleration. The slope dropped like a guillotine and she tucked low, her coat fluttering violently behind her. The snow wasn't soft, it was razor thin over a bed of ice. But Elise didn't break. She let the mountain speak to her through her edges. She cleared the first ridge with a feathered carved knees, absorbing the shock with precision. Her speed surged past 90 km/h. Down below in the observation stands, the crowd hushed. Someone gasped as Elise veered dangerously close to the cliffside edge, her body barely avoiding a patch of exposed rock. Noah, standing behind the safety barrier, felt his heartbeat sink with every twist she made. A voice behind him whispered, "She's flying." But then came the first trap. It had been set discreetly. Natalia's trick, the real cruelty beneath the show. A rogue patch of ice, unnaturally slick, hidden in a blind spot behind a spray of snow. Elise hit it at full speed. Her skis lost purchase, time slowed. For a second she floated. The crowd inhaled collectively, but Elise didn't panic. Instead of fighting the slip, she let it carry her, twisting her body midair in a maneuver she'd once practiced during a blackout blizzard in Montana. Her left knee dipped, her right foot slashed out for balance, and she landed in a backward carve, realigning her trajectory in a controlled slide. Her braid whipped around, catching the sun like a comet tail. The crowd erupted. A coach watching from a side platform dropped his clipboard. "Did you see that?" he yelled into his radio. "She's improvising like a pro." Another responded on screen. Live stream comments flooded in. "Who is she? I thought she was a joke. That move, that was elite." Elise didn't hear them. She was already scanning for the next threat. Her eyes picked out a series of moguls far too aggressive for this course, set close together, deliberately positioned to break rhythm. Another sabotage, she leaned into the chaos. Instead of avoiding them, she danced over them, absorbing the impact through her legs, letting the unpredictable terrain propel her like a piston. Each jump bled momentum, but she converted every loss into grace. The crowd was stunned silent. At the halfway marker, a checkpoint camera caught her expression, focused, not strained, her hat still on, her skis still holding. Natalia, watching from the VIP balcony, was no longer smirking. Her fur hat had begun to slip. "She's not supposed to," she muttered. Elise thundered into the final third of the slope. The hardest part, Death Curl's signature, was a hairpin turn carved into a narrow chute on either side, sheer drop. Most skiers decelerated aggressively here, often missing the gate to save themselves. Elise didn't decelerate. She bent lower, carving an angle so sharp her inside ski scraped sparks against a rock beneath the snow. Her body compressed, then release. She slingshot out of the turn with a cry of edgework perfection. The sensors blinked at the base, measuring her entry into the final straightaway. From the distance, she looked like a missile, a streak of white against the blue shadow of the mountain. Her coat, fluttering violently, had lost its wrinkles under speed. Her skis, scratched and weathered, were singing. She crossed the finish line, 47-2, The scoreboard blinked, then flashed red. New record faster than any male or female skier on the mountain's official record. Faster than anyone expected. Faster than Frosthelm's own sponsored athletes, many of whom were watching, now slack-jawed, their pristine uniforms suddenly meaningless. Elise skidded to a slow stop. Snow curling around her like smoke, silence fell. Not the kind born from politeness, but the kind that follows awe. Someone clapped. Then another, and then the mountain erupted. Coaches, journalists, staff, even guests. Applause roared from the viewing deck, a wave crashing over the same crowd that had jeered her half an hour ago. Her father, thousands of miles away, dropped his phone, face wet, whispering, "You did it, baby girl, you did it," in Elise. She just stood there, skis buried in snow, chest rising with deep, steady breath. Her eyes scanned the crowd, not for validation, but for acknowledgement. She had spoken, not with word, but with every turn, every slash, every ounce of muscle memory built through seasons of pain. The simple woman had just carved her truth into the Alps. And no one, not royalty, not fortune, not scandal, could ever take it back. As the final echo of her record-breaking time rippled across Frosthelm Peaks, Elise stood still at the base of the mountain, her chest rising with the rhythm of a storm that had just passed. The cold burned her cheeks, but she didn't feel it. The applause washed over her like distant waves. They weren't clapping for what they saw. They were clapping for what they had missed, what they had mocked, and what they could no longer deny. But amidst the thunder of awe, something subtler stirred, something Elise didn't yet see. Natalia Van Cleef hadn't moved from her perch on the VIP terrace, flanked by frozen smiles and half-finished cocktails. She stared at the scoreboard like it had betrayed her personally. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from agents, questions from sponsors, whispers from other elite families. One headline had already surfaced. Unknown skier, destroys, death curl, record in second-hand gear, and then another Elise Wren, the fall and rise of a forgotten champion. But what shattered Natalia was not the speed, not the style, not even the history-defying stats. It was the live camera catching Noah Marchand as he broke through the barrier, sprinted across the snow, and pulled Elise into his arms with all the care of a man who had never doubted her. The shot of his face eyes shining, jaw clenched with pride, was broadcast instantly to millions. He didn't say anything to the cameras, just held Elise. Tight, protective, grateful. The contrast was brutal. Natalia, once the undisputed darling of Frosthelm, now watched as the mountains shifted beneath her feet. Her fur hat, once a crown, slipped further as the weight of what was coming became unbearable. Elise, unaware of the chaos unraveling in the shadows, looked up at the LED leaderboard once more. Her name, etched in crimson, flickered with each breath of alpine wind. She didn't smile, not yet. Instead, she looked over the crowd. The same people who had ridiculed her just an hour earlier now stared with reverence. Some were already crafting redemption narratives, others angling for interviews. A few hung back their shame too fresh. Then came the moment no one expected. A man stepped forward, silver-haired, tall. His ski jacket bore the crest of the Olympic Committee. The cameras swiveled to catch his approach. "Elise Wren," he said, voice steady, amplified slightly by a discreet clip mic that was not just a record. That was a rebuke. The crowd hushed. This mountain has never seen such precision, such control, such fire. You didn't ski. Death. Curl, you rewrote it. Elise blinked and unsure if he was real. "My name is Victor Kalin," he continued. "I was on the Olympic selection board in 2016, and I owe you an apology." The air froze. Victor turned to the cameras, his face solemn. "Years ago, I was part of a decision that disqualified a promising young athlete due to a doping allegation. We later discovered was forged. I didn't fight hard enough to stop it. Today, watching you, there's no doubt. We were wrong. You should have been on that team." Elise's throat tightened. People gasped. Phones trembled in gloved hands. The truth had been whispered in online forums for years, but never spoken aloud. Not like this. Victor continued, "As of today, I'm submitting a formal appeal to reinstate your eligibility and open a review into your case." Natalia turned pale, but that wasn't the twist. Not yet. The twist came 30 seconds later when a reporter, bold and efficient, shouted from behind a velvet rope, "Miss Wren, is it true that Natalia Van Cleef's father was behind the scandal?" The crowd held its breath. Noah's grip on Elise's hand tightened slightly. Elise stepped forward. She didn't raise her voice, didn't clench her fists, But every syllable hit like a blade against glass. Yes, she said, he orchestrated it. He used his power to erase my name from the list of qualifiers. And he did it so his daughter could rise uncontested. Natalia's fur hat finally fell to the snow, and I stayed silent for years. Elise continued, her voice steady, because I didn't think it mattered, because I thought no one would listen. But the truth, no matter how long it waits, always finds snow to carve its name into gasps, murmurs, fury. Reporters scrambled. Headlines updated in real time. But Elise wasn't done. She turned to Natalia, who now stood at the edge of the terrace, her entourage melting into the background. You called me a beggar, Elise said. You called me a disgrace, but I've worn failure like armor. I've eaten rejection. I've buried my dreams and still stood taller than you ever have. Natalia tried to speak, but no words came. Elise took one more step forward. You have everything, Natalia, money, fame, and yet you needed me to lose to feel worthy, and then the final cut. I didn't come here to win a race. I came to reclaim what was stolen. And I did, with a knit hat, scratched skis, and silence sharper than your diamonds. The crowd who had once cheered Natalia's elegance now turned with visible discomfort. Whispers spread. Disapproval bloomed like wildfire. But the real thunder fell seconds later, when Noah raised his voice for the first time. My name is Noah Marchand, he said, stepping beside Elise, and I am formally cutting all personal and corporate ties with Van Cleef Holdings. Gasps echoed. The bank will be removed from every partnership with Marion Technologies, he added. Effective immediately. Natalia swayed, but Noah added, eyes sharp. I will honor one promise. You said if Elise won, you would apologize on camera. And donate $2 million to a charity of her choosing. Silence. Do you keep your word? Natalia hesitated, her lips parting. Then with every lens pointed at her, she whispered. Elise raised a hand. It doesn't matter, the world saw. That's enough. But Noah shook his head. No. Love let her answer. Natalia stared at Elise for a long moment, then defeated, broken, her voice barely audible. I apologize. The words hung like fragile snowflakes. And the donation, someone asked. Natalia nodded. Yes, I'll transfer it to the National Youth Ski Foundation, Elise said clearly. For kids like me, who have talent but no money, no privilege. A roar of applause, this time from hearts that had changed, not just eyes. As the crowd began to move, a young girl in ill-fitting ski gear approached Elise shyly. I used to think I'd never belong here, she said, eyes wide. But now I think maybe I do. Elise bent down, her hand resting gently on the girl's shoulder. You always belonged, she said. They just didn't know how to see you. And somewhere in the crowd, a new story began to write itself. Not about gear or gossip, but about grit. About the power of showing up when no one believes you should. Elise didn't need a gold medal that day. She'd won something far rarer. Justice and the respect of a mountain that bowed only to those who earned it. The sun was lower now, casting golden shards of light across the white sprawl of Frost-Helm peaks. The mountain glistened like a sleeping giant, tamed for a moment by something far greater than skis or wealth. Truth. Elise stood near the finish line, her breath still curling into the alpine air. But the weight on her shoulders had changed. It no longer pressed down. It anchored her. The crowd had begun to disperse, not because the moment was over, but because it had left them raw, changed. And no one quite knew what to do with that. The elites who had whispered insults just an hour ago now stood in cliques, heads bowed, conversations halting. Even the camera crews paused longer than necessary, uncertain how to pivot from a public crucifixion to a public coronation. Elise felt the shift in the snow. She wasn't just the girl in the wrinkled coat anymore. She was something else now, an answer they didn't know they were asking for. Noah stood beside her, his hand still gently at her back. But for the first time since the day they met, he said nothing. Not out of hesitation, but reverence. He'd known Elise was strong, but watching her rewrite history with her silence, with her skill, and finally with her truth, it had cracked something open in him. He turned to her, voice low, so only she could hear. You didn't need to say anything, but you did, and now the whole world can finally hear what I always knew. Elise looked at him, the hint of a smile flickering beneath her exhaustion. I didn't do it for the world. He nodded. I know, that's why it mattered. But the day wasn't over. As they began walking toward the lodge, the shadows behind the resort grew longer, colder. Inside those walls, consequences had already begun to stir. Across the balcony where Natalia had once presided, like snow royalty, her team scrambled, lawyers on phones, sponsors in panic. Her PR manager trying to draft a redemption narrative before the public backlash went nuclear. Elise passed them silently, not even sparing a glance. She didn't need to see their chaos. Her presence was enough to haunt it. Inside the Grand Lodge, the scent of cedar and expensive bourbon filled the air. The velvet furniture, the gold-plated fixtures, the quiet hum of jashish. It all felt surreal, as if the resort was trying to erase the blood that had just been spilled on its ice. But Elise didn't sit. Instead, she made her way to the main fireplace where a handful of guests had gathered. Some clapped awkwardly when they saw her. Others stood, shame etched into their postures. Among them was Ethan Caldwell, the tech mogul's son, who had mocked her most viciously earlier that morning. He looked different now. Smaller, not physically, but in presence. He approached slowly, his hands shoved into his designer coat. Elise, he began. I didn't know about your past, about what happened to you. Elise looked at him, expression unreadable. He cleared his throat. I said things I shouldn't have. Cruel things, and I didn't think. You didn't have to think, she interrupted softly. You just had to feel, Ethan swallowed. You're right, I didn't feel. Not until I saw you on that slope. A pause. If it means anything, my mother texted me during your run. She was crying. Said you reminded her of herself when she was young. Elise's eyes softened, but she didn't let him off the hook. Don't wait for someone else to feel it for you next time. He nodded, shame settling over him like snow. As he walked away, Elise turned and found someone she hadn't noticed before. A woman mid-40s wearing a staff jacket with an older logo. She held a tray of untouched cocktails but wasn't offering them. I worked here the day they opened this place, the woman said. Voice low, eyes fixed on Elise. And I've never seen the mountain respect someone the way it did you today. Elise tilted her head. The mountain doesn't care about resumes or bank accounts. The woman smiled. No, it just listens. And today it screamed your name. Word spread that Elise was inside the lodge. One by one guests trickled in, not out of obligation, but something stranger. Humility. They didn't ask for autographs. They didn't beg for selfies. They simply stood near her as if by proximity they might remember what integrity looked like. Then a girl approached. No more than 12. Her puffy jacket was clearly secondhand, the sleeves too long. But her eyes, those eyes were fire. I watched your whole run, she whispered. Twice Elise knelt down. Did it scare you? No, the girl said fiercely. It made me want to be brave. Elise smiled, pressing her knit-gloved hand gently over the girl's. Then that means you already are. The girl's mother appeared, eyes glassy with pride. She mouthed, thank you, and led her daughter away. That moment meant more than any headline, but not everyone was ready to move forward. From the corner of the room, Elise spotted someone she hadn't expected. Victor Kalin, the Olympic official who had spoken earlier. He approached again, his demeanor respectful, but this time more personal. I said what I needed to say in public. He told her, but I wanted to add something in private. Elise listened. I've watched athletes my whole life, gold medalists, world record holders, but I've never seen someone ski with the kind of clarity you did today. She stayed silent. Victor reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. I know reinstating your eligibility won't undo the past, but there's a qualifying event next month for the World Ski Finals. I'd like to sponsor your entry. Quietly, without strings. Elise looked at the envelope but didn't take it yet. You owe me nothing, he added, but the world deserves to see you ski again. This time without shadows, Elise reached out and took the envelope. Not for revenge, for completion. As the evening wore on, the fire crackled behind her and the crowd thinned. The resort had been reshaped, not in design but in memory. The old frost helm, the one guarded by privilege and sharpened by cruelty, had fractured. In its place, something newer, more uncertain had begun to grow. Later that night, Elise stood on the balcony of her budget cabin. She could see the slope from here, the death curls still lit by trace lights glowing softly like an altar. Noah joined her silent for a long while. Then finally he said, there's a board meeting on Monday. They want me to spin this, to say you were part of some brand campaign, that it was all curated. Elise didn't laugh. She only said, let them wonder how something real slipped through their filters. He wrapped his arms around her. Do you want to disappear now or keep going? She looked out at the snow. Not disappear, she said, but not play by their rules either. Then we do it our way, Noah whispered. One mountain at a time. The stars above blinked quietly. And far below, somewhere in the comments section of a live stream, still playing, someone wrote, She didn't just beat the record, she beat the system. Another replied, I came for the crash, I stayed for the crown. And still another, a knit hat, a broken legacy, a new queen. Elise didn't see those comments, but she didn't need to. The mountain had spoken, and for the first time in years, she'd spoken back. 2 days later, the wind at Frosthelm Peaks was gentler. Like even the mountain itself was breathing differently. The snow had fallen overnight, not a storm but a quiet dusting, the kind that softens the edges of everything it touches. Elise stood at the edge of the same slope where she had made history. Her knit hat pulled down over her ears, the same secondhand skis resting against her shoulder like old friends, but she wasn't here to prove anything anymore. The resort had changed, even if it didn't admit it. The staff greeted her now, not with forced politeness, but with hesitant respect. Strangers nodded their gazes longer. Softer, she was no longer a curiosity or a punching bag or a PR accident. She was a name. A record, a shift, but change never comes neatly wrapped. It stirs quietly in the corners before it shows up in the open. As Elise made her way through the lodge, she noticed it the way the concierge now looked directly into the eyes of young skiers from modest backgrounds, the way the rental line had doubled, not with the usual elite tourists, but families, students, athletes, without agents. Something had cracked open and the wind had blown in. She was supposed to leave that morning. Her father had already texted saying the cabin was ready back in Montana, the wood stove humming the slopes nearby, aching for familiar skis, but Elise hadn't packed yet. Instead, she found herself drawn toward the media room, where the resort hosted post-run interviews. The place was empty now, just rows of folding chairs and a banner still hanging lopsided that read, Winter Elite Invitational. She sat in the second row alone. For a while, she simply listened to nothing to her breath, to the faint ticking of the old analog clock above the door, and then a voice spoke from behind. I almost didn't come back today. Elise turned. Natalia Van Cleve stood at the doorway. No fur coat, no entourage, just a gray sweater, jeans, and tired eyes. Elise didn't respond. Natalia stepped inside slowly. I thought it would be easier to vanish. Take some time, wait out the headlines, but then I realized, hiding is a luxury too, still. Elise said nothing. Natalia looked down at her hands. I've spent my whole life believing the world owed me something. Just because I was born into it, I wore my last name like armor, like it meant I couldn't lose. But I did lose, Elise. Tilted her head slightly. You lost control. Natalia nodded. And credibility, and friends, sponsors. A bitter laugh. Even my dog sitter dropped me. Elise allowed herself a small, dry smile. Natalia sat down, a few rows away. I didn't come here to get sympathy or to ask for forgiveness. I just wanted to say something out loud for once, not rehearsed, not designed to win back likes. Elise waited. My father is stepping down, Natalia said. The bank is being investigated. Turns out silencing people has a paper trail. Noah's team made sure the right eye saw it. Elise's gaze didn't flinch. He hasn't spoken to me, Natalia added, and he shouldn't. The room was quiet again. The kind of silence that holds space. Then softly, Elise asked, why tell me all this? Natalia breathed out. Because no one else would believe. I meant it. A pause, because you're the only person here who never needed to impress anyone. Elise studied her for a moment. Do you regret what you did or that you got caught? Natalia met her eyes, both in the wrong order. But I'm trying to fix that. They sat in silence after that. No apology was asked for. No handshake was offered. But for the first time, Natalia didn't look like a villain, just a woman who had lost herself in a house built on someone else's lies. Elise finally stood. Fix it quietly. Not on social media, not through articles. Start where no one's watching. Natalia nodded. I will. Elise left without another word. Some weights don't need lifting, they just need setting down. Outside, the air was brighter. Sunlight danced off the slopes as if the mountain too was in a better mood. Elise headed toward the main square where a modest stage had been erected, originally for performances, brand showcases, influencer panels. Now it had a different purpose. The resort, still scrambling to balance the backlash in the new narrative, had agreed reluctantly to host a public acknowledgement. Not a ceremony, not a parade, just a moment, a microphone, a spotlight not powered by privilege. Elise didn't write a speech. She didn't want to. She walked onto the platform with her knit hat and coat exactly as they'd been the first day. She scanned the crowd, young faces, old ones, rich, modest, awkward, hopeful. Some of the elite were still there, but quieter now. Observers, not rulers. She stepped up to the mic. No script, just breath. When I came here, I didn't want to make history, she began. I didn't want to break records. I didn't want to make anyone bow. She paused. I wanted to ski. I wanted the mountain to hear me again. Somewhere, a little girl in the crowd squeezed her father's hand. I was told for years that I didn't belong in places like this. Elise continued, because I didn't have the right name, the right story, the right silence. She let the words sit. But the truth is none of us really belong anywhere until we choose to, until we show up anyway. A murmur of agreement spread. I don't want this place to be about me. I want it to be about every girl who was told she wasn't fast enough, smart enough, beautiful enough, rich enough to take up space. She looked directly into the crowd. Take up space, the applause didn't explode. It swelled like a wave coming in slowly, then roaring, once it hit the shore. After the speech, Elise didn't linger. She didn't wait for interviews. She didn't wait for cameras. Instead, she found Noah at the back of the crowd, leaned in and said, let's go home. They didn't take the private chopper waiting at the summit. They took the shuttle, the same one she arrived in. But this time, it didn't feel like escape. It felt like closure as they left a drone camera hovered overhead. But Elise didn't look up. She had nothing left to prove to the lens. That night back in Montana, her father waited on the porch. When Elise stepped out of the truck, he didn't speak, just opened his arms. They stood like that for a long time, mountains behind them, wood smoke curling into the stars. Later, as she unpacked her coat, Elise noticed something tucked in the pocket, a small, folded piece of paper. She opened it. You changed the slope, you changed me. No name, just a single initial. But the paper smelled faintly of Natalia's perfume. Elise smiled, folded it again, and placed it on the mantel above the fireplace. Not as a trophy, not as forgiveness, but as a marker that even the worst stories could find new endings. She turned toward the window and saw the slope behind their cabin gleaming under moonlight. She'd ski it tomorrow. Not for records, not for redemption, just because it was hers. And when her skis cut through that powder again, there would be no crowd, no cameras, no cruelty, only the mountain, and it would listen.